into it, let me preface today by saying, like, first and foremost, I'm just sharing what's worked for me and my experience. And like every individual out there, we're all unique. All our own on our own path, on our own journeys, and we need to find our own way through these things. So, if we were to look at like really successful people in business, they're not following in anybody else's footsteps. They're forging their own ground. They're not looking for a recipe. They're actually doing it a little bit differently. They're actually creating the recipe, so to speak. So I'm going to invite you to do that rather than just like taking what I say and doing exactly as I did or anybody else has done. Filter through this all for you, what resonates for you. And that leads me actually to like my very first tip, so to speak, which is, you know, instead of doing it like somebody else is doing it, when we find your own way through, there's a vulnerable edge to that. And that can actually be a really good thing to find and to lead you or to have as a guide for yourself. So whatever pushes us out of our comfort zone are always a unique territory to be in. I've never actually found myself being able to do very well successfully just by replicating, but I've done really well by pushing myself just to the very edge of my comfort zone, not terribly leaping beyond it, but flirting with that edge. So that's been the thing that I look for. It's actually like a landmark for me to know if I'm in target or not. If I'm just sticking with the same old recipe and I'm not pushing myself, then it's likely going to feel kind of flat in my own system, and that energetically translates to my audience, and then they might feel kind of energetically flat because of that energy. So it's deeply tangible. So the more we can sort of flirt with that edge for ourselves and begin to push it, we also begin to expand. And there's something really attractive about expanding energy that people flock to. I think of it almost like the heat of the sun and how it radiates, how it expands, how it helps things to grow, how it brings things to life. In that same way, we become the sun of the solar system for other people around us to be attracted to. And I used to say that a lot, actually, when I used to teach free fall, which is now being offered underneath a different name, underneath my own stuff. It's actually called Befriending the Body Mind. And I used to say that like free fall was the best, hands down, business building seminar there was out there. And we did not talk a lick about business. So why did it work? Well, we cleared out stuff around the heart space. We cleared out stuff around the blocked expressions of your system, being able to energetically illuminate what was wanting to be shared by your authentic expression to begin to attract other people in alignment with what it is you were offering. So for that reason, I have just noticed it time and time again, having a front row seat, having stewarded many a person through the free fall process over the years, and noticing it in my own system. That was very much the reason, the impetus, the motivation behind becoming an instructor for myself in that terrain. So watching and learning and seeing what seems to work for people and how it clicks for them is a component to developing our own creative thing. You may even choose to mimic certain pieces from different people, then ultimately cobbling it together to make it your own. And I might just leave it at that. I've got a bunch of points to touch on. The hardest part about today might be saying everything I want to say in a half hour, as it often is. So I'm going to actually just pop up a couple of slides here on the screen, and looks like that's nicely there. Okay. And a couple of considerations. So let's dive into other things that are going to support return clientele. The pieces that I've already spoken to are the energetics, I think, of it to an extent, and we're going to go even more into those things. One of the things that I love is being able to enter a space that feels comfortable for me. And the first point on here isn't really just geared towards appropriate attire to wear. An appropriate attire can actually really vary from person to person. So whatever it is you're wanting to attract more of, dress that way. So I these days I jokingly call them my professional pajamas. I'm professional, but I'm comfy, and I love that vibe. It feels really authentically mine. So I dress appropriately in alignment with my energy to be able to set other people at ease within their own authentic energy. Years ago, I used to say, dress really formal, dress really appropriately, over the top even, because the more woo-woo out there, the stuff it is we're offering, the more people might need that reassurance that we're still professionals amongst us all. We're not flaky hippie woo-woo people. We're here with you, even though we understand maybe a different angle of how we're perceiving our world around us. We're ultimately still just like everybody else. So to take out the spiritual divisiveness that I was for myself noticing over those years, I wanted to actually become more relatable. So I pared down how it is I was dressing. So I'm still on the nicer side when I dress. I'm not showing up in my pajamas. I know I call them my professional pajamas, but dressing in a way that makes people feel comfortable, relatable, as well as having your space curated. So it is a place that people want to return to. Before you see the people on the table, the touching is, I think, one of the most critical ways to establish communication at various levels. And the touch may or may not be physical. The touch may be, I touch people in my communication with how it is I'm speaking to them. I touch them with my eyes as they're walking up to the venue where I'm offering my services that day, usually in my office, but sometimes I work on the road, so you never know where I'm going to be. And then I move into whatever appropriate level of comfort they may have with touch. So obviously not touching anybody who looks deeply uncomfortable about that, but I may offer a handshake, or if they look like they're a hugger, I may just simply ask, like, hey, are you a hugger by chance? And then they usually are like, yes. And you can kind of read that in people, even by how they're carrying themselves. When we begin to touch people, there's already a rapport that's building up. And again, you're seen as friendly, relatable, and you're not treating them clinically or coolly with the evaluating eye of, I'm just trying to see what's wrong over here so I can fix you. Doesn't tend to go very well. I don't know about you all, but I don't necessarily love being a lab specimen. I love being in human connection and human contact with each other. So being warm and having that invitational essence on multiple fronts, I think is a really important part to this all. Touch also begins to impart information in ways that goes beyond what the rational mind may be able to ascertain. They say it's the only touch we cannot have in order to still be alive and to survive. So there's good information there. If babies can't receive touch, they don't thrive, they don't live, they can't actually survive for very long in this world. There is deep information that gets shared on multiple fronts. So I never underestimate that. And I tend to use touch a lot, even when I'm using the time on the table. Obviously, our techniques have touch involved, but simply placing a hand on the belly, typically speaking, like many body talkers do, to stay in connection. And then we're doing our yeses and our nos, then we're doing the techniques. And for some people, that might be the only time they get touched that week, that month. I have some people who live alone. There's deep loneliness and isolation at times. Coming out of COVID, there's still layer upon layer upon layer of touch and the lack thereof that we're still seeing in clinic spaces that need to have some additional corrections around, because it comes at a cost. We begin to lose our desire to be present on multiple fronts, and that can be detrimental to every single symptom and every single health issue and every single reason people are coming to see you. So touch is a broad brushstroke. I can't talk about it enough. I am going to switch gears away from it though. Having an explanation around what BodyTalk is that you're comfortable with in delivering it. I'm going to invite you to even like rehearse that, to tape it, to get some feedback. I'm sure I'm not the first person to speak to these things before for y'all. And having even just like a bite-sized like what is BodyTalk response. So for myself, I often have I have kind of a sexy soundbite that usually captures people's attention pretty quickly because of my own story. What's BodyTalk? Well, I found BodyTalk, and I kind of sidestep the question just for a second, and then I go into answering the question, and I say, I found BodyTalk when I was dealing with cancer. And then people usually pause and they listen, like, uh-huh. And I'm like, and it helped me through my various different layers of symptoms, and it was honestly the godsend I needed. as I was also in medical school at the time. And this was a very different way of understanding how to heal my body other than being in Western medicine. So I really got to know it through the lens of it being a system that helps people with pain and stress from the inside out. And then people are usually attracted to that because it's kind of sensational. And then they also understand that I too am a human being. I too am meeting you as a human being from the inside out. We're on this journey together. This isn't about me being the professional and you being the one to receive what I am doing for you. This is us being on equal playing ground and me just offering you information that could be of service for yourself, which for us as practitioners, that might take out the, if you have this, imposter syndrome. And I don't know a practitioner who hasn't traversed the imposter syndrome territory. So finding our way to feel authentic when we're presenting information in all the angles that we can is, I think, really key in being able to create more unity in our, not just our connections with each other in a professional setting, but also in our world. Because the more we practice that for ourselves in our professional settings, the more it leaks out into how it is we're navigating our lives. And I can think of nothing better that this world could use a little bit more of. So having that explanation at your fingertips and having it well crafted. From there, I usually find that people will just get curious and they'll ask questions. And I don't even need to have any more spiels prepared. I have spiels prepared, but I usually just let them ask the questions at this point because I got carried away with giving a lot of spiels very early on. And I would talk and I would talk and I would talk to the point where they would kind of like back into the corner and they were like, I'm feeling really trapped in this conversation almost. And I couldn't stop because I was so passionate about what I was doing and what I was sharing. And I learned over time to sort of balance that with their specific curiosities. What do they want to know about? And then I can meet them exactly where they wanted to be met. And it just became more of a relatable relationality interaction. And amongst that, next thing I want to share about talking is to start our sessions with a very specific sort of routine. So however you're starting your sessions, it becomes almost like a ritual, which is great for ourselves to anchor ourselves. And it creates safety because people know what to expect. They have a sense of this is what's going to happen each and every time I'm here. So I honor that. And I do the same standard intro. If you've ever had a session with me, you've heard something similar at the beginning. It's changed over the, I want to say years, but really decades at this juncture. And I do something that's a bit more elaborate at times too, in more of a group setting than I do one-on-one, but I still have my standard way of beginning. And that anchors my energy into what I'm doing, and it anchors their energy into what they're doing. And again, it creates a wider web of safety because they know that they can trust that this is what's going to happen now that we're beginning here. It's kind of like doing a warm-up before you do your workout at the gym. You don't want to hurt yourself by just launching into your workout. So you have a standard warm-up often that's utilized. There's one way we could think about that too. All right, so along the lines of communication as well, communicating what we're doing with the appropriate detail level for the clients that we're working with. Broad brushstroke, this is going to vary from person to person greatly. So if you know the person on your table is a carpenter, then aiming your explanations in ways that might make more sense to their background versus someone on my table who's an accountant. Those are two different explanations that I'll probably give. I'm also overall aiming my explanations to be at about a 10-year-old level of understanding. I don't care how smart they are. I don't care if they're a neurologist. I don't care if they're an astrophysicist. I'm still going to use small words. I'm not going to go into big concepts or overly intellectualized because I don't want them in their heads. I want them in their bodies. That's where the feeling to heal happens. It doesn't happen when we're trapped in our heads so much. And that's usually where all the problems have to a vast degree began, is our thinking about these things. If we can traverse that territory by inviting them into more of a feeling state, can get into their bodies a bit more by just simply minimizing the amount of words that we're using and minimizing the verbosity and the high level vocabulary down to a simple level, it makes it more tangible for not just them to pick up on to get them out of their heads, but to also meet the components of them that are still trapped and stuck in the early phases of life. So it actually sets up a level of safety and rapport so you can deal with their inner cast of children that is likely the birthing place of their current symptoms and their current challenges that they're facing in life. Most of it began, I would say, even back to birth itself. But I think I can trace just about anything back to birth these days. So don't get me started on birth. We'll be here for at least another half hour, if not several half hours. I'm gonna come out of the birth right now. I'm gonna resist that temptation. And follow-up is important. Telling them when to come back, how to come back is such a unique thing, and it varies from person to person. I've danced this territory, I think, through every potential thing, and I've tried it all on, sometimes for years at a crack. Where I've ultimately landed in this area is inviting people to watch for themselves what they're noticing. And I might give a few examples. Watch how your body's feeling, watch how your mind is doing, watch your emotional states. And I'm asking for them to track that on purpose, because that's where they're going to begin to notice some level of change. And sometimes we need some help pointing that out. I'll talk about more on that in just a second. And I also follow up with, you're welcome to come back whenever feels right for you. You're your inner expert. And then I drive them into, again, an invitation to contemplate what's happening for themselves. Notice what's happening inside of you. Notice when you might feel like you need to come back again. Book in. And then if you notice that seems to be every so often, you might track it for yourself and go, I do really well when I'm getting BodyTalk sessions every 3 weeks, 6 weeks, etc. I find it far more effective if they find out that information for themselves, and versus me talking down at them to say, this is how it's done. Now you should do it this way. I've never overly found that model to work very well for my sensibilities and how I wish to stand in this world and the values that I carry in this world. So you need to find what it is for you. And if you do really well with like, it's every so often, then that's the way that it works for you. And you get to honor that too. There certainly is no right way or wrong way to do any of this, just inviting you to notice some details in this regard. And the ortho eval is, I think, one of the best things I ever did for my business to build it in ways that make sense to people who may not be able to track their internal experience. They might not have interoception be as readily available. Lots of people don't, especially if they've been compromised with some trauma, or that just hasn't been an area that they've developed within themselves yet. The ortho eval, as I mentioned, was like range of motion testing. For instance, like a straight leg raise, you'll see how high the leg lifts. And I do that before I do the session, and then we do the session, and then we might not go anywhere near the legs. I might do like a circulation plug-in of, let's say, I'll keep that simpler. Let's say it's like lymphatic drainage through their throat. And we might do some work on linking like their senses through to their heart space. And we might do a few other things. We might go nowhere near the legs. And it never fails. When I go back to do some work with testing the legs after the session, there's a noticeable change. And it's usually not small. And I love that. And I point that out to clients so they can go, oh, I never realized that what we were doing impacted me in such an overall manner. And then it points to the interconnected web that we have inside of us. That when we change one thing, we actually can see an impact anywhere else in the system from changing one thing. That's true not just within the human, but between all of us as humans. So as we change, our world can't help but change around us, which I think is really such a cool concept. We often get stuck in like, oh, the world out there is this, or it's that, or whatever. And I know I'm prone to that. And when we can see that the change is happening from the inside out, it begins to lure people into going, oh, I don't actually need to look for the answers out there. I don't need to try to change out there. I can just work on what's in here. And that in turn can be change enough. So it begins to potentially seed curiosity, which is one of the most healing things. And it's going to be the thing that attracts your clientele to return to you, because then they're going to be curious for even more. They're going to be hungry to know even more. And they're going to have that desire, that not motivation, but enthusiasm to begin to dig into it. How does this work? Tell me more. I want to learn even more about how that thing that you just did on that technique supported me. from there, you can send them into education around different courses, I used to have like lending libraries over the years. Now it's sort of easily findable all on the YouTube, Vimeos, etc. Having a stack of resources to give people, and maybe even crafting like a little library for them on a website, which has like a bunch of the tools collected, can be really useful. So a bunch of this we've already really spoken to. So we've talked about professionalism. The next point on here, speaking from a place of confidence versus trying to convince people. I find that it's really attractive for me to not be sold to. I don't want to be sold to, and I don't think anybody else really wants to be sold to either. So instead, I think of it as education. I'm going to put the dots of all these pieces really close together so that the only logical conclusion is really to, I should maybe consider trying this out. And that seems to be far more effective than trying to give them studies and trying to give them proof and trying to give them the results and trying to give them the intellectual information as to how this works and why this works. So how can we provide a sense of enthusiasm and a sense of confidence from within ourselves as we're sharing the information? So it's not so important what we say, it's just how enthusiastic are we when we're expressing that information. When we do that, it also means that we're not so much speaking from the headspace of the brain, we're actually speaking more from our heart, from the felt sense. And that's going to attract people in a very big way. It's our brain that goes a little bit like, I gotta convince them, I gotta make this make sense. And we start to panic a little bit. And as soon as that happens, it's taken our authenticity out of the equation, and people can't feel us. People can't find us anymore. And they're looking for you to steward with your care, with your grace, how it is you're operating through this system. Self-care knows no bounds in these arenas. If we're not taking care of ourselves, it's going to show up eventually in our practice. We can only fake it for so long that we're not taking care of ourselves. So that might look like not necessarily just taking classes, which is a key important part of educating ourselves, as well as getting sessions to work through our own things. It also means just basic day-to-day things in life, taking care of our own challenges, our own problems, because the more those add up, the more work we have to do for ourselves. And the more, once we chew through those work layers, we'll have to offer other people because we've been there. We've understood what it is to be in those shoes. And people can feel that from the inside out in ways that go, again, far beyond the logical left brain. So the more we work through whatever layers of life that are being presented to us, the more you're going to attract people in those arenas. So after I made my way through my first divorce, I was healing drastically. It wasn't necessarily the time in the middle of that to go through and offer, all my insights and awarenesses and classes on how to navigate a divorce. But afterwards, on the other side of it, I garnered a certain amount of understanding from the inside out. So that's when I crafted, more of those sort of offerings of, okay, I've been through these layers. Let me see what I can offer other people amongst it all. And in doing so, integrate my own experience even deeper, because we're a part of it too. Anytime we offer anything else to others, we also are receiving it too. So I'm going to switch gears away from that. And I want to talk about something that is often the concern. Are people going to come back to me if clients are feeling some other way than good? So what happens when a client isn't feeling good after a session? I think this is actually a really brilliant time to understand BodyTalk and what's actually happening within the human experience. This is a really precious time. When this sort of thing is happening, when people are just struggling to understand, why do I feel worse after a BodyTalk session? It's the time to go, okay, so first, let's just notice that something's happening. So it means BodyTalk is doing something. That something may need some time to be integrated and may need some time to be moved through. It may need some time to be understood. Because often in our world, people go, oh my gosh, I'm feeling emotional. I shouldn't be feeling this way. Well, yeah, that's true. If you're used to being shut down, feeling emotions might feel really vulnerable and pretty scary and pretty challenging and maybe even mildly traumatizing if we don't actually know how to deal with that because our caregivers didn't steward us through that in our early lives. Yeah. So now you are the caregiver in do-over mode. So in do-over mode, in corrective experience mode, now you're the one who gets to guide your clients and let them know Emotions are normal. This is actually a natural thing. Feeling is healthy. These things are natural, they're healthy things to be in, and those occurrences happen all the time. Whatever happens in your body and your minds is actually truly welcome here. And because it's not feeling so welcome here, you're treating what's been happening in the session with a little bit of resistance. So we get to be curious now together about where that resistance is. And our next session might focus on just that point of going like, hey, I don't really know what this is happening. There's a change in my life. I don't actually know how to open up into it. Great. We have a portal into new territory that you've never faced before. It's like you're graduating out of elementary school and now you're ready for high school, or you're graduating from high school. Now you're ready for university. You're ready for that next stage of learning. You're ready for that next stage of growth. Otherwise, this wouldn't be happening. Okay. In this regard, I think we've hit some really key things. We've hit some really big things. And being heart-centered is probably my number one tip, and supporting your own journey along those lines with the different educational pieces and exploring your own self is probably one of the key things. And then being able to translate that into potentially other wider arenas to draw people in on an ongoing basis and to retain clientele is actually to offer ongoing education. So things like doing a presentation every now and then on something specific, or just doing like a day where you invite people over and you do sessions where other people get to watch each other people's sessions. You get to learn, educating along the way as you go, can be really instrumental in continuing to keep your own practice alive and supporting your own creativity and your own growth in these ways. And as long as you're pushing, again, your comfort zone, you're going to keep attracting, I find, business and people and returning people to you, because you're pushing that edge. You're going, okay, this is kind of cool, it's kind of fun. And people are going to be drawn to that. Honoring people's end times. So if you know that clients need to be out of there at a certain time, then honoring that too and being mindful about that. I have had a few experiences where I've gone not to body talkers, but for other things. And I've ended up running overtime to the point where it eat into the other appointments that I had scheduled that day, and it threw everything off. And I never went back to those people again, because it was just like, that's too much of a risk for my schedule. My time is tight often in my life. So I need that to be honored. I typically have my waiting area, if they are needing to wait, full of educational things. That way they can take a moment to learn along the way. And they have promotional items there too around upcoming classes, upcoming other things that you might be offering. So maybe you have a day of a presentation that you're offering somewhere. So promoting it in all the places that you can. I love that you guys are doing this and that the energy is so deeply alive and that we're having some fun along the way. So thanks for having me. And I look forward to have our paths cross again.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Allison.
My pleasure.